It was a typical night for Trucker Jack, cruising down a quiet highway, when a group of thugs decided to make his journey anything but ordinary. They ambushed his rig, smashing windows and tearing apart his truck with ruthless force. But what they didn't know was that Jack wasn't just any trucker. He was a former Special Forces operative with skills that went far beyond driving. As the attackers closed in, they had no idea what they were about to face. When Jack's past comes back to haunt him, the tables quickly turn. But just when it seems like victory is in reach, a new danger emerges, leaving Jack with a tough decision to make. Can he fight his way out, or will his past be his greatest enemy? Stay tuned to find out. Jack hadn't thought about his military days in years. The missions, the danger, the loss, it was all buried deep inside him, locked away. He had left that life behind when he chose the quiet, lonely roads of trucking. But as the thugs surrounded his rig, those old instincts kicked in like muscle memory. He quickly assessed the situation, too many of them, too few resources. His only option was to keep them guessing. With the flash of a knife in the moonlight, one of the attackers lunged at him. Jack dodged, his reflexes sharp despite the years, and in one swift move, he disarmed the man. But before he could regain control, a chilling voice echoed from the darkness. "You think you've got the upper hand, soldier." Jack froze. He recognized that voice. The voice sent a cold shiver down Jack's spine. It wasn't just any thug, it was someone he knew, someone he'd thought was long gone. His mind raced back to a mission years ago, one that had gone sideways. The betrayal, the bloodshed, the men lost. Jack had left behind not only his career, but also unfinished business. "You're still alive," Jack muttered, trying to steady his breath. The shadow in front of him stepped forward, revealing a familiar face, though older, harder. The man smiled, but it wasn't the grin of an old friend. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Did you really think you'd escape it all, Jack?" he said, his tone dripping with menace. "You don't just walk away from us." The thugs around Jack closed in, but this time it wasn't just about a robbery. This was personal. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. He hadn't come this far to be taken down by ghosts from his past. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for redemption. But as the tension built, Jack realized the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. The man in front of him wasn't just a reminder of old wounds. He was a signal of something much larger at play, something dangerous, and something Jack couldn't avoid anymore. A shadowy figure in the distance watched the scene unfold, their intentions unclear. Jack's fight for freedom had just begun, and it was only a matter of time before he'd have to confront what he thought was buried forever. Jack's pulse raced, and the grip on his knife tightened. Every muscle in his body was alert, ready to react. But it wasn't the men closing in around him that worried him. It was the man in front, the one he used to trust, the one who'd betrayed him. He could see it now, the plan that had been set in motion all those years ago. But Jack never could have imagined it would come to this. "You think you can still outsmart me?" The man sneered, taking slow steps toward Jack. "I've been watching you, Jack. Every move, every mile. You might have been Special Forces, but you're just a relic now. The world's moved on, and so should you." The thugs edged closer, forming a tight circle, and Jack's mind raced for an escape. But there was nowhere to run. The highway was empty, the night still, and his truck, his only means of defense, was nothing but a wreck. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and yet there was a fire inside him that wouldn't die. As the man raised a hand to signal the others, Jack's eyes flicked to the shadows. That figure, the one he couldn't quite make out before, was it another ally? A hidden enemy? Every instinct screamed at him to be ready. "Time to finish this," the man said, stepping even closer, his voice barely a whisper. Jack's mind was sharp, his body tense, and in that moment, everything slowed. He could hear his breath, the shuffle of boots on gravel, the eerie stillness of the night. He knew that whatever happened next would be the final test, not just of his training, but of his will to survive. The air crackled with tension. The man raised his weapon. Jack's heart thundered in his chest. And just before everything erupted, a single question lingered in his mind. Who else was watching? Just as the man in front of Jack raised his weapon, a loud, sudden engine roar cut through the stillness of the night. The sound of tires screeching against asphalt. Jack barely had time to react when, out of nowhere, a massive black SUV tore into the scene, skidding to a halt just inches from the thugs. The headlights blazed, momentarily blinding everyone, and for a split second, the air seemed to freeze. "Get down," a voice shouted from inside the SUV, followed by a burst of gunfire that sent the thugs scrambling for cover. Jack didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. The SUV's doors swung open, and two figures stepped out, moving with military precision. Both were armed, faces obscured by black tactical gear, but there was no mistaking the skill in their movements. These weren't random mercenaries. Jack's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? The man who had been taunting Jack cursed under his breath, his eyes flashing with recognition. "You should have stayed out of this, Jack," he hissed. But the newcomers didn't flinch. One of them raised their weapon and fired, hitting the man in the shoulder with perfect accuracy. The thugs began to scatter, disoriented by the sudden turn of events. Jack watched as the SUV's backup lights flashed, preparing to drive off, but something didn't sit right. Why would they save him, only to leave him in the middle of this mess? As the last of the thugs fled, the mysterious figures approached Jack. "You're not safe," one of them said, voice muffled by their helmet. "Get in the truck. We're not here for you, but they are." Jack's head was spinning. Who were these people? And who was they? But before he could ask another question, the sound of more engines reached his ears. Heavy, growling engines. More vehicles were on the way. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The air grew heavy with the rumble of engines approaching fast. Jack could feel the tension in his muscles as the two figures motioned for him to move toward the truck. He didn't question them. He didn't have time. The mysterious rescuers weren't just here to save him. They were here to stop something bigger, and the clock was ticking. "Move now," the one who spoke earlier commanded, as the first of the incoming vehicles came into view. Jack was in survival mode, every instinct pushing him forward. He could feel the cold weight of the gun in his hand, still clenched tightly. They piled into the truck, and as the engine roared to life, the SUV that had rescued them peeled off into the night, leading the way. Jack's head was spinning, trying to process everything. Who were these people? What did they want? And why had his past come back to haunt him like this? The figures in the SUV led them down a winding, hidden path. The truck lurched as it tore through the underbrush, Jack's heart racing as headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. The enemy was close, too close. He had no idea how many were coming after him, but he knew the fight wasn't over. Then, just as the truck veered down a sharp curve, the sound of another vehicle caught his attention, a low, menacing hum. Jack glanced over his shoulder and saw it. The same black SUV that had appeared earlier, but now it was no longer alone. Dozens of motorcycles surrounded them, their engines roaring like wild animals in pursuit. His rescuers wasted no time. The driver floored the accelerator, but the road was narrow, and the motorcycles were catching up. Jack could hear the screech of tires, the sound of a distant gunshot. He didn't know what was happening, but the chase was on. and there was no turning back. "Brace yourself," shouted the other figure in the truck, who had stayed silent up until now. Before Jack could react, the back of the truck opened up, and the roar of gunfire filled the night. The riders on the motorcycles scattered, trying to avoid the deadly spray. Jack's mind raced. He was no stranger to firefights, but this was different. Whoever was after him had resources, and they weren't going down without a fight. Just as it seemed like they might escape, a shadow moved ahead, another vehicle. Larger, menacing, with flashing red lights. Jack's blood ran cold. It was military grade, a vehicle he recognized all too well from his past. They weren't just outlaws, they were connected to something much bigger. Something much darker. The truck swerved violently, and Jack's grip tightened on the edge of the door. He could see the figure in the military vehicle now, standing tall, a silhouette in the dark, watching them with cold, calculating eyes. "Get out," the rescuer shouted. Now, Jack barely registered the command when the truck skidded to a stop. The world around him seemed to slow as the military vehicle came closer, its tires crunching against the gravel. The last thing Jack heard was the faintest whisper from the shadow in the truck. "This is only the beginning." And before he could react, everything went black. The final twist hit him like a punch to the gut. The people who'd rescued him, they weren't on his side after all. When Jack finally regained consciousness, he was back on the road, the cold night air stinging his face. The truck was gone, and the figures who had rescued him were nowhere in sight. The military vehicle had vanished too, leaving only tire tracks behind. He didn't know where they'd taken him, but he knew one thing: he wasn't out of danger. The shadows of his past still loomed, and he realized that the betrayal had come full circle. His past wasn't just a memory, it was a weapon, and the people who had once been his allies now saw him as a threat. Jack's journey wasn't over. The fight for survival wasn't just about escaping anymore, it was about uncovering the truth. But in this world, some truths came at a price, and Jack was ready to pay.